Being a pioneer farmer of German descent in eastern Washington during World War I and World War II came with a unique set of challenges. During both World Wars, but especially during World War I, German Americans were viewed with suspicion. Many communities saw them as potential spies or enemy sympathizers. German speaking families often faced pressure to abandon their native language. Schools discouraged or outright banned the use of German, and churches had to switch to English services. German immigrants and their descendants often faced harassment, threats, and sometimes violence. Property vandalism was not uncommon. Some German American families even changed their names to avoid discrimination, making their names sound less German and more English. Eastern Washington, though fertile, had an arid climate that made farming difficult. Pioneers had to deal with low rainfall, soil erosion, and occasional dust storms, particularly during the 1930s Dust Bowl era. During both World Wars, the U.S. government controlled agriculture prices. While demand for wheat, a staple crop in Washington, was high, price controls sometimes limited profits. During World War II, food and fuel rationing made farm operations more difficult. Many young men were drafted, leading to labor shortages on the farms. Some farmers relied on prisoners of war or Mexican laborers to compensate for lost workers. German Americans were often required to take loyalty oaths to prove their allegiance to the U.S. Some were even forced to publicly renounce Germany. Although Japanese Americans were the primary group interred during World War II, some German Americans were also monitored, detained, or placed on watch lists. Farmers who maintained correspondence with relatives in Germany were especially vulnerable to government scrutiny. German language newspapers and cultural organizations were often shut down, and any perceived pro-German activity could lead to arrest or confiscation of property. Many German American families suppressed their heritage out of fear. German holiday traditions, food, and music were often abandoned. Many German farmers in eastern Washington were Lutherans or Catholics, and German-speaking congregations declined as services transitioned to English. Older generations who held on to German customs often clashed with younger generations eager to assimilate and avoid prejudice. Despite these challenges, many German American farmers persevered, contributing to Washington's agricultural economy. Over time, anti-German sentiment would fade, but the scars of discrimination and cultural loss remained for many families. A sense of purpose and resilience. Farming was not just an occupation, but a way of life. The farmer would have been deeply committed to working the land, despite the arid conditions of eastern Washington and the unpredictability of crop yields. Life as a pioneer farmer was already difficult anyways. Unpredictable weather, droughts, pests, and economic downturns were part of daily reality. The farmer would have developed a stoic attitude, accepting hardship as inevitable and relying on self-sufficiency. Conflicted national identity. Many German immigrant farmers held onto traditions, language, and cultural customs, viewing them as a source of strength. They may have maintained German language church services, read German newspapers, and celebrated German holidays. During both World Wars, anti-German sentiment forced many German Americans to publicly demonstrate their patriotism. The farmer may have flown an American flag outside his home, emphasizing the English over the Germans, and even discouraged his children from learning the German language. Fear of being watched. Rumors of German spies were rampant, and the farmer would have likely been wary of speaking German in public or writing letters to relatives in Germany, fearing government surveillance or community backlash. Even if the farmer had lived in the community for decades, wartime suspicion could have made interactions tense. The farmer may have faced gossip, hostility, or outright threats from neighbors who questioned his loyalty. The family may have withdrawn from public gatherings, church events, or social functions to avoid unwanted attention. If the farmer had been a legal U.S. citizen or was born in the U.S., he may have felt betrayed by the hostility of his fellow Americans. He may have wrestled with resentment, wondering why his family, who had worked hard for generations, were still considered outsiders. If the farmer still had relatives in Germany, he would have felt torn between worrying about their fate and avoiding any action that could make him seem sympathetic to the enemy. The farmer, likely worried about economic instability, government price controls on crops, and potential labor shortages if his sons or farmhands were drafted. During World War II, labor shortages would have been a constant stressor, forcing farmers to rely on prisoners of war or temporary labor programs. Many German immigrants were devout Lutherans or Catholics, relying on faith to cope with discrimination, economic hardship, and uncertainty. The farmer's belief in God and hard work as a virtue would have helped him sustain emotionally. The farmer may have struggled with conflicting emotions, patriotism for America or sorrow for innocent people suffering in Germany. Above all, the farmer's mindset would have been shaped by the desire to endure, provide for his family, and ensure that the future generations had a better life. He may have encouraged his children to fully assimilate, learning English and adopting American customs, and distancing themselves from German heritage to avoid further discrimination. The mindset of the German-descended pioneer farmer during the World Wars would have been shaped by resilience, fear, and determination, and a deep but often conflicted sense of identity. The struggle to maintain traditions while proving loyalty to the U.S. would have weighed heavy on the pioneer farmer, leaving a lasting impact on both his family and his community.